Hello and welcome to Faith Evolving. My name is Mary Claire, and today I'm gonna yell a lot, honestly. I'm gonna yell a lot. Well, everyone, I finally returned those library books that I've needed to return. And this microphone is so tiny, it's adorable. And that's about the extent of the good news, the fun things in this video. Hey y'all, I had a whole introduction to this video, and in the week since I recorded it, a lot of things have changed. The original inspiration for this video was because of all of the anti-trans bills and everything specifically in Texas, and how that story broke about the same time that Russia invaded Ukraine, so it got buried. There's a similar one in Idaho that's moving forward. From what I read, there's not a super high likelihood that it would pass, but all of these bills are still inflicting terror on trans people and families of trans people, and that in and of itself is a problem. Not to mention that in Iowa, the governor did sign the bill saying that trans kids can't play sports corresponding with their actual gender. So it's still bad. This is an ongoing issue, and it's not going anywhere. With that being said, this video is a bit more somber in tone than usual. I do mention death rates. And so if you want to sit this one out, if it's going to be triggering truly, sit this one out. And I just wanted to do that disclaimer a little bit so you're not caught off guard. All right, without further ado, the video. This is a definitive statement. Trans kids and trans adults are sacred, deserving of affirming protection, and bearers of God's image. Gender-affirming care is life-saving. Now, let me give you some facts. There's a resource that was published by Cornell University, and let me just read you the overview. We conducted a systematic literature review of all peer-reviewed articles published in English between 1991 and June 2017 that assessed the effect of gender transition on transgender well-being. We identified 55 studies that consist of primary research on this topic, of which 93%, found that gender transition improves the overall well-being of transgender people, while 7% report mixed or null findings. We found no studies concluding that gender transition causes overall harm. As an added resource, we separately included 17 additional studies that consist of literature reviews and practitioner guidelines. Now, it's been 5 years since 2017, which makes me feel some type of way because I graduated high school in 2017, and it definitely cannot be 5 years since I graduated high school. Oh no, I'm aging. But yes, other studies have been conducted, but still, that's pretty telling. Next up, what are the care plans for transgender youth? Or youth that are like, hey, I might be trans. Well, what is proposed by the academic pediatrics people is social transitioning. So literally like, hey, let's dabble in this. Like, yeah, dress differently than what your assigned sex would tell you to dress, and like maybe play around with your name and we'll walk alongside you. Then when a child is in puberty, they can take puberty blockers, which are reversible, to kind of delay a decision. And then after that, there's some developing science about whether one can stay on puberty blockers forever, or if it affects bone density, or you choose to take estrogen or testosterone, or to just go off of puberty blockers and get, the hormones that your assigned sex, would give you. There are options, and it's developing, but by demonizing the conversation, by demonizing doctors, by demonizing parents who have an open communication with their children, causes so much more harm than the off chance, since the vast majority of people who gender transition don't regret it. But the off chance that a kid explores and they find out that they were wrong, and so they just reverse everything, and they just learn that sometimes people are wrong. Like, that's not a terrible lesson to learn. Because yeah, when it comes to an open conversation with your kid, that's what kids need, not banning all of that. Because here's the thing. Trans people are going to exist whether you allow them to get the health care that they need. It's just, you'll make their lives a living hell. And likely they won't live a long life as a result. But hey, maybe that's the goal. Because after all, this anti-trans legislation is violence. The science shows that it greatly decreases anxiety, depression, suicide in transgender people. Without this, kids will die. Not all of them, but some of them. Christians, is that a chance you're willing to take? It is not a chance that I'm willing to take. You see, I've learned so much about God from my trans friends. There is so much vitriol and hatred towards trans people in the Christian community. And it not only makes me angry beyond belief, but also it does not make sense to me. People who say, God doesn't make mistakes. Well, what if being trans is not a mistake? What if being trans is a revelation of God's transformative power? Whatever happened to being new creations? Why did this piece of legislation pass on the same week that the reading in the lectionary was the Transfiguration? When Jesus encounters God on a mountain with his buddies, and his clothing transforms, and God says, "This is my son whom I love, listen to him." And the people in our lives, the people in this world who know a thing or two about transfiguration, about transformation, we don't listen to, we don't love. One of my dear friends let me borrow this book for this video, and now I want to buy it myself, and you can see that they marked so many things in this book. And it's called Transforming: The Bible and the Lives of Transgender Christians. And it was written by and collected by Austen Hartke. And I want to uplift two parts of this book, when really all of it's great, and I will be reading this all the way through. I only kind of skimmed looking for things right now, if I'm being completely transparent to you, because I wanted to get this video out, and I realized, wow, I haven't actually read a lot of trans theology. I should do that, so I will be doing that. So let me just read a part of this introduction, literally right away, called "Did God Make a Mistake?"
As a teenager, I believed strongly in the idea that everything happens for a reason. And if that was true, then there must have been a reason God had made me with a body that was designated female when I was born. Even though I had known for most of my life that I didn't feel like a girl, I did my best to ignore that fact and push it down deep when I didn't have to think about it. The biggest hurdle that I faced in addressing my gender identity was that it seemed like saying God was wrong. So imagine my relief when I started coming across scripture passages that appeared to have something to say about gender identity and the way God made the world. I learned from Job that sometimes things happen in the world that don't make much sense to us human beings. I learned from Abraham what it's like to have your name changed. I learned from the Apostle Philip that sometimes you have to say yes to God even when you have no idea what God is doing. And of course, I learned from Jesus, who after his resurrection chose to show his body to the disciples, a body that was scarred and transformed and yet still his own. Before long, I was finding my own answer to that original question. Did God make a mistake? Personally, my answer is no. I don't believe God made a mistake in creating me just as I am. God created me with a body that was designated female when I was born, a body that I struggled to connect with for the first 26 years of my life, and that I now finally feel at home in. But God also created me with a capacity for change and with a mind that identifies as male. I believe that God made all of me, gender identity included, and intended for me to be a transgender person who sees the world through a different lens. I don't think God made a mistake. I think God made me transgender on purpose.
This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him. Trans people, trans kids, do not exist as some sort of pawn in some made-up culture war. They are people who are trying to live their lives in the way that they were created. And by not listening to trans people when it comes to our faith, by not welcoming them and affirming them, we are not caring for them, and like I said, we're not listening to them.
And therefore not learning.
There's a bit in a chapter that's about beyond apologetics, because the faith of trans people is so much more than defending themselves to Christians. And Austen writes about talking with and interviewing Taj Smith, and he quotes Taj as saying,
"There is so much hunger for spiritual development throughout the different trans communities I've been in. People are really seeking something that's bigger than them, whatever that is. They know that there is something that propelled them into transition and into embracing who they truly are. But a lot of times, they can't encounter that in a church because of the dogma that gets in the way."
So hey, Christians, can we maybe listen? I myself am cis, and so in this video, I wanted to uplift trans voices, especially towards the beginning. But there are a few things now, towards the end, that I wanted to uplift because it's really great material, but they happen to be written by cis people. The first is this article called "From the Same Spirit, Receiving the Theological Gifts of Transgender Christians" by Mary Elise Lowe. And in it, she tells a story about one of her students who had parents that were not affirming of them. Peyton's parents are Christians and told Peyton, "God made you a boy, and God doesn't make mistakes." Allow me to suggest that Peyton's parents are making two harmful theological assumptions. First, they think that God created only at the beginning of creation. Second, they mistakenly believe that only God creates. Today, many trans people are co-creating new identities and reforming their body minds, thereby demonstrating God's ongoing creative activity in the world. God doesn't stop creating when we shoot out the womb. Our lives are ongoing. They're constantly unfolding. What a beautiful example of what God does in our lives. The other resource that I wanted to uplift was a sermon preached by Reverend Marcella Gillis about the Transfiguration in 2018, I believe, and during Pride Month. And it is absolutely fabulous and talks about how the Transfiguration is in part used as, a metaphor for coming out, but also the Transfiguration has what I would consider been abused to mean white is right. So really, really interesting sermon that'll be linked below, as well as all the other resources that I mentioned. And really, this is an ongoing thing, because trans kids will always be sacred and deserving of affirming protection and reflections of God's image. And I have a lot to learn. So I would love if you all dropped really great resources that I can peruse through. This is only the beginning when it comes to learning, but also this is probably only the beginning when it comes to anti-trans legislation. So also linked below is a resource where you can look to see, if you live in the United States, about anti-trans bills in your area, so we can keep fighting. That's the video. I need to go to class now. Thank you all for watching. I would like to give a major shout out to my patron saints over on Patreon. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Should have said that earlier in the video. I always forget because I get fired up. Okay, bye.